practice and is likely to be the interpretation here. But I do think that is a poor interpretation, and even if it is the current interpretation, we'll abide by it without complaint, other than trying to change it. So that will be, that we do things right above the table. You'll see it, it's right here. We won't be sneaking around.
Right.
The other piece I'd like to, I'm sorry, go ahead. Wendy, go ahead.
No, I'm saying that I don't believe that's true, because when people lost their parking
Yes, ma'am.
in the Doug Landau parking
Yes,
lot,
ma'am.
they had to go get it somewhere else. They went to the hardware store. So that has not always been that way.
I'm not
When they
convinced it is that
changed-
way now, but in any case, that's Mr. Jones who knows a lot's postulate, and if he proves right, then he proves right. And if it isn't, we will, we will investigate that and make our point and address the question, because we're curious about it way beyond y'all.
Okay.
Way, if you change your mind tomorrow morning,
Right.
and they gave you all your money back and you left, we would be interested in this question, because sooner or later, it's come up before, it'll come up again. The other piece I would just say is that, as I do at night, because again, I really have no life, I drive down to that corner at 10:30 after I leave my other favorite bar on Friday nights, and I look at our park that's down there, and I ride around a couple of other streets that are trouble spots, only they rarely are. So the area is actually packed. Is actually packed at night after 10:30. Oddly, as soon as Park Atlanta no longer is involved, the parking spaces are full. Hello, sir, how are you? Good to see you. Listen closely. And I know. And so there really aren't parking places back there. The parking lot went behind your building and behind there and through everything, and it's all packed as you would expect it to be. So to Ms. Huell's comment, I hope that you can do your best to manage that. I mean, there's no magic bullet on that, but, and the other piece we're counting on you for, honestly, is...
Right, but in one sense, you know, it's good, in one sense it's bad. If you go over in Edgewood now, I mean, it's 10,000 people over there, you know, 15,000. I drive through there every weekend.
Right.
I make my round all, I mean, it's literally out of control.
Right.
And there's no parking.
Right.
But then, like you were saying, just think if nothing's there, you know, if I didn't develop it and it was
That's
empty.
right. That's right.
You know, so, I mean, it's
I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to that. No, I think that's a fair point. I mean, the area is stuck between wanting stuff and not having any parking, and we don't have any parking. I don't care what the business is, there's no parking for it. And so that's a problem. So I guess what we're gonna make a subjective request to you here, one that's harder to measure, but a lot of what I suspect our neighbor is addressing comes down to actually the way it gets managed there. I mean, there's a way to manage this in a way that keeps the fun and games inside and doesn't let it spill outside late at night, and it's a different scene late at night.
What you have to understand, we own a place, last Saturday, we did 1,400 people. So managing people is not a problem. It was never in 3 years, in College Park, about as bad as it hit. We've never had an incident. Never. We've never.
Keep knocking on plastic, we're for you. So that ultimately.
So managing people, you know, doing something for 35 years, you know, I pretty much know everything about it.
Well, I invite you to come be on the board, because we got a lot more years than that here, and we don't know a damn thing, but it's okay. I appreciate your point, I take your point. So that will go a long way to it, and if there's any stuff that happens, neighbors complain rightly or wrongly, or the mix, and it's usually a mix of right and wrong in my experience, we'd like to come find you, you're the manager, Mr. Jones, and we'd like to come talk to you about it and get a...
Mr. Watley, you thinking about me, it's okay. It's normal, normally it's women, I was thinking about me.
Friends here know that I can't remember their names, so trying to remember two brand new Mr. Jones is beyond me. In any case, sir, we'd like to have that open and have a frank response from you when that happens. And if there's any silliness that we ought to know about, we'd rather you wrote or called us and told us about it than we heard it third hand through somebody else. I'd appreciate that. We'll get you numbers. In any case, as I said, we want to know what the planning department has to say about this parking issue, and I wouldn't bet against you, but we're going to be asking. So we'll be down there to get onto that. In any case, it doesn't affect you in the immediate future, because Mr. Landau, to our knowledge, has no immediate plans there, but he would be the person to ask, not us. So Yes, ma'am.
Clarification on that point, so there is no lease currently drafted with Linda. This is just your hope.
Yeah, this part of it is what I was trying to get to before he told me not to talk and sit down. Was that you mentioned a couple of other, you two ladies mentioned a couple of other businesses that might possibly be a little bit more palatable to the community. And it's really a conceptual thing, like an idea, a concept of, you know what I'm saying, how it's gonna be presented, how it's gonna be set up, things of that nature, so that he wouldn't have to stop doing what he was doing. Like I was trying to mention earlier in reference to the code, if I don't convert it, and I say I do a business such as what you're referring to, the two that you referred to, it would be mercantile with a food service permit, and it would still be able to have alcohol is what I was trying to get to. So the parking isn't, like I wouldn't have that requirement, is what I was coming to you guys to come and, you know, be upfront and say like, I want this to be conforming, you know what I'm saying, bring it into conformance, you know, so it wouldn't be just one table, it could be ran like a proper business, what the point is. So like with the parking, we're gonna try and get that lease, CVS, whichever other spots that are available, you know, if we gotta piece them together, we wanna make it work. But we want you all to be accepting of the idea or the concept. You know, if the concept needs to be altered, you know what I'm saying, then,
How, are you actually open to that?
I mean,
Actually, you know, we only have one thing in front of us, and I only want to talk about the stuff that's in front of us. So yes, ma'am, do you have a question about what's in front of us, not about what somebody else might do at some point, and what we might do if somebody did that? Yes, ma'am.
Some
Wendy.
people like to.
I need to make this comment. It seems like the scenario that you've laid out here about that business is that you think that it will be given grandfathered status and you won't have to supply the parking if you lose the parking wherever you have acquired it. That leads to resident-only parking. And when the neighborhood gets full of resident-only parking, no one is happy. The merchant is not happy, and neither are the people who live there. And that's the way it eventually will play out. If people are not really required to get parking off-site and keep that parking, be responsible for keeping it.
we're gonna try and keep the parking is the point.
I
Just a
know,
little
I
bit
know.
more incentive.
No, we're talking we're talking observations about the long-range
Yeah.
nature of the neighborhood and what happens in these circumstances, and that's Ms. Curry's comment.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments from our applicants? All right, do we have a motion regarding this? Well, we don't have to have a motion. I mean, the MPU will take it up. We can absolutely renew it. I mean, I can generally say that we stand by the code here, and to my knowledge, they have appear to meet all the, once you get a walk-in with a lease signed by Mr. Landau, mark the spaces, I believe you're gonna meet the requirements. And, you know, we intend to discuss to see whether or not the theoretical point of in the future, if those spaces leave, you and other businesses are similarly covered. And that's with that understanding that we will be pursuing that point, which we, as I said, we pursue if you won the lottery tomorrow and went off to the Bahamas, then we would be pursuing that if we're interested in it. I think we thought we knew the answer, but sir, you've given us another answer, and that's why I wanted you to sit down and be quiet, because I didn't know the answer. So it's a joke, Mr. Jones. All right. Is there any other? Do anybody want to make a motion on this? All right. We will see you next week at 7 o'clock. If you'll bring the lease in with you from Mr. Landau, and that would be excellent. That would, I think, cinch it. And we will be talking to the planning department. I'll be glad to share with you who we're talking to, because I know you'll share. You mentioned Mr. Enrique and Mr. Bascanana, and I'll be telling you, there's going to be no secret here. There's no secret to any of this. So it's not going to stop you now anyway. So, and given that lot's been there for 6 years and hadn't gone anywhere, and Who knows, so, that's,
Yeah, like what you were just mentioning, you know, what we got on the table right now, I was just hoping that you guys would, make a motion to move forward to support us at the MPU.
well, we might, you never know.
I mean, I wanna actually, have that for you, I'll have that for you, or have something for you, and if it's an alternate scenario with the parking, I'll have those site plans, and I'll have those, that, you know, the leases to account for what it is.
Well, that's, I think that's it. I can
But
tell
I
you, we
want-
play by the code. I mean, we play Cole by the code.
Yeah, what we spoke of last week was this scenario.
That's right.
So this is what I brought.
That's right, no, I know, but you need the lease, but that's cool. I believe you're gonna get it, and we know how to reach you. He left his phone number, Mr. Watley did, Mr. Van Jones did, Mr. Thomas, Mark Jones did. We're around, we appreciate that you're in the neighborhood, I appreciate your answering the questions. Anybody got anything, last thing? All right, so I think absent that, we will see you next week at, yeah, Monroe and Hilltime. Thank you, Hillside. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thanks for coming.
Mr. Dent, thank you. See you next week.
Just because something's smoking to it until a glass of wine, I don't see how that converts into a bar that runs till 2 in the morning.
You know where we're not gonna resolve it, probably?
That's why I didn't say anything,
Right, I
but
know.
I don't get
So,
it.
we have one of the world's best consultants on our payroll, on our mighty answers questions for us if we're lucky, and so we'll ask that gentleman when the time comes.
Did
And
you
that's
ask,
it.
speaking of asking her, did you ask him about the number of uses per node? That's
I
part of
know,
the
but I
system.
counted them, we're not there.
Okay.
It's 17. We have a guest who found his way over here from the church, because I didn't have your email, and I should have emailed you and I would have, but I mean for the library.
Floyd@AtlantaGA.gov.
All right.
No excuses.
It's not a great
You tell them.
That's
Not
right.
a great excuse, but I believe one of your colleagues came last month in your stead. Actually, it was your boss.
It
was your
my
boss.
Exactly. I told him that you deserved to see him, and I made him come out, and he came out. But to
Should have
address
heard what he said about you, but anyway.
to address the comment about Edgewood being out of control, I know that it may seem kind of chaotic at times, but it's organized chaos that's always under control.
You could have spoke right up, you know, you put your hand
So I
up.
just want to clear that. I just want to clear that for the record. I know we on the record, so I want to clear that. For the one new person, I am Lieutenant Floyd with the City of Atlanta Police Department, Zone 6 Precinct, here on a monthly basis to report on crime. Other than the bank robbery,
Just a bank.
other than the bank robbery, I mean, things were looking really good for 601's beat. But then that happened and derailed my whole speech. So, but that particular incident has been forwarded to commercial robbery, which is a centralized unit. And so, and they're following up on that.
Those guys are still, they haven't caught him.
Yeah, to my knowledge,
They trashed the car down to Mount Zion Boulevard, right?
yeah,
You know,
they
never
still
got the
following up
people.
on it. And I think they've also made an arrest of the person that actually worked at the bank for giving false information that may be connected to it overall as well. So,
Side operation.
yeah, it's an ongoing investigation.
I don't know if this would be totally uncool, but can you tell us who it was? It would probably be public record who was arrested.
Well,
I mean, I think it may be in the case file and it won't be public until the case,
Okay,
case is
all right.
closed. But
It was Sarah. Have
It
they
is
been,
public
okay,
record.
no.
Other than that robbery, we had 0 burglaries, 0 ag assaults in the past 28 days. The vehicle larcenies have moved to the 700 block of Ponce de Leon. So I mean, we had 0 vehicle break-ins. I mean, within the 601's beat, but on Ponce de Leon.
what steps are you taking to improve those things, sir? How can they go down from there?
No more bank robberies.
I mean, it's gonna be hard, I mean.
Somebody give us
it's
back stuff that they already took?
It's only uphill from here, but I mean, overall, things are looking really good on 601 Street. Virginia-Highland. So,
Good news.
So Lieutenant Floyd, why is crime so low here? You only get 30 seconds, but why?
well, I think it's because of the plan of action that my major and captain has put in place to target the enforcement in the areas that the crime spike.
Wow.
Awesome. Ain't no film, huh?
Bosses are gonna love.
Well, thank you very much. Hopefully I have the
Would you consider
endorsement.
that the weather, the cold, and the rain might have helped keep those numbers down?
It's possible.
That was part of the plan, I'm sure.
But I think it was because of the manpower that we have in this community day in and day out.
Visible presence.
And Frazier, if they can get God on their side, I think that's a good thing.
That'll help too.
In some communities, we need God.
Whatever works.
Yes, ma'am.
This is just a funny story,
Okay.
but a long time ago, there was a policeman that worked in this area, and I won't call his name. But he had a long discussion with me one time about, he said, why do you think crime goes down, Winnie? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, we just don't report it.
Oh, no, I can't co-sign on that one. No, ma'am.
Now, he has been gone a long time, like I said, but he was a guy that, I
Well,
couldn't believe
I
it.
always, I'm in every community meeting, and I always encourage the community members to report the crimes, because that's the only way that we can accurately come up with a plan to address the issue. So yeah, that may have been years
It
ago,
was a long time ago.
but the day has changed. Yes. So. With that, I mean, are there any questions, concerns, criticisms?
Yeah,
that
get
I
on
may
the
need to
stick.
take
will you?
back? That I may need to take back to the precinct?
We thank you.
I mean,
Next time, we
enjoy this, because, I'm sorry, this only happened a week and a half ago, which is no excuse.
is this the new location?
No,
no,
they're
no.
voting
It's a
over there.
one-off.
They're
Voting.
voting, they started voting in there at the last second, so. Thank you, I'm sorry that I didn't email you.
They put a sign.
No, they didn't put a sign up there. I put a sign up there.
You're responsible for
Yeah,
that sign?
that's right.
Non-conforming
It's like
signs, you're in
Chinese.
trouble.
All right, thanks for coming over. I'm sorry for the hassle.
Real quick, one last question. The larceny of vehicles, the 700 block, is that the Home Depot, Whole Foods, Starbucks?
No, that's 650. That's gonna be just up from like Chipotle.
Okay.
It's barely in Virginia-Highland.
Chipotle,
Chow
What's
mein.
that?
I was just trying to
Chow
understand where
mein,
700
that
was.
Restaurant.
yeah, what's that club?
Oh, I got you. I got you.
Club,
It changes names, the
JQ.
JQ and then the other thing, yeah. Okay,
All
thanks.
right, well, thanks for
All
coming
right,
over. I
thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
me. Have a good
Thank you.
evening.
Thank you.
No, it changes, it's two names, like one JQ, then it goes to something else.
Okay, we're gonna run quickly through the agenda. I don't have anything on the Inman tree appeal. Ours is moot, and I believe the applicants are still negotiating now down to what trees go where at Inman to replace the trees that will come down, have been permitted to be removed for the possible renewal. Excuse me, expansion. The COA infrastructure bond referendum, we've already heard and acted on that. Do you want to say anything about that, Monroe?
I guess briefly, some members of the board met with the developer who's been hired by the owner of the parcels at 10th and Monroe about possible redevelopment, and they indicated that they would like to see land use changes and rezoning to allow more than single-family development along those parcels. And we just had a very preliminary discussion, and they agreed to take a look at their, the scope of what they want to do and revisit. So that's really all that happened.
Didn't we do this a couple years ago at the NPU? Is it the same developer?
No, it's not the same developer. The last time at the NPU was the Beltline, actually. So the NPU voted on the Beltline Sub-Area 6 plan. And the Sub-Area 6 plan did not include any changes to the land use of those parcels. So now there is a private owner who owns most of the single-family homes along that triangle. And he would like to rezone that land to something more than single-family.
And is that coming up at this coming up MPU meeting?
No, nothing has been filed.
Will you let us know when that is?
Well, nothing has been filed, there's been no application filed.
Gotcha.
It won't be a secret.
Yeah, nothing has moved forward.
It was
And I guess I'll just say one more thing, Jack, I'm sorry. During that meeting, the developer has not historically been involved. It's a new developer that's brought on. So we just shared some of the history, and the history of the MPU vote, and the history of our neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods' position about redevelopment of single-family land and changes to the CDP. So that's really all it was. We provided a historical perspective of this is how these issues have been looked at historically and traditionally by not only our neighborhood, but the NPU and surrounding neighborhoods.
Thank you.
The next item is a large event study at Piedmont Park, which is specifically the piece that we had, that is still and will be going on for a few more months as Aaron Fortner and Joel Mann from Nelson Nygaard try to sort through some of the permitting and issues and processes at City Hall in large events at Piedmont. We have in front of us at the moment the Music Midtown application, which is for September, which is as pretty much as it was last year. And it's not coming before us here, so we reacted at the NPU, and the NPU is in the midst of trying to negotiate with other NPUs to react to that. Do you want to add anything, Debbie, at this point?
Jack and I have made the rounds between the other neighborhoods that surround the Piedmont Park to try and get consensus so long that we were not successful at MPUE. They actually voted to deny it, but we're still pursuing a recommendation. Jack, I heard from Ebony today. She's got a meeting set up. We just need to tell her time and who else we want to invite to the meeting.
So it's really a bunch of, there's some, if you have no life, there's some fascinating process issues involved, and if you do, it's not so fascinating. But MPUF has not made a recommendation, has instead, so far, and has instead chosen to try to negotiate with the applicants in the hopes of ameliorating some of the huge challenges that are there. And I don't know how this will play out. It's completely unclear to me how this will play out, or exactly what the process is, to be honest. It seems to be evolving in the middle, but that's all I have to say. Let's move on to the Budget Committee.
Jack, before you go on,
Yes.
the Claremont Hotel parking reduction, are you choosing not to have a recommendation?
I would be glad to bring it up. There's a recommendation from the owners of the Claremont Parking Hotel to apply for a parking reduction due to challenges involved with building a proposed parking deck in the rear because it's on top of a sewer line. Historically, when items, the reason it's referred to us is it's within 100 feet of our NPU, it's Ponce to Win. I think the consensus in the planning committee was that it was unlikely that anybody, or that very many people would survive crossing Ponce to Win to park in our neighborhood, so we didn't think it was a problem. We historically support the recommendation of the neighborhood association so impacted, which is Virginia-Highland, which is a vigorous and active group. So certainly I'd be glad to move that in with regard to this VHCA support, whatever the recommendation of the Virginia-Highland Civic Association. is in regard to the proposed parking reduction at the Claremont Hotel. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. Is there further discussion?
What is the parking reduction?
Oh, it's
The
something
hotel's
like,
got, what, about 90 rooms in?
something like that. It's from like 89 to
Yeah, 80
35 spaces or something.
75 spaces?
80, I think they're down to about
I
35
don't know.
spaces. They've got a,
So that's really not a
It's not
problem,
enough.
from, as a hotel person.
no,
That's not a problem.
it's really not a problem, and they actually are gonna have more parking, but they just, because of the fabrication that they're using to build the parking on top of the sewer lines, they can't count it. So the parking will be there, but it's not countable,
Okay.
if any of that makes
And they
any
do
sense.
have they are putting in a sky bar type thing above that, and supposedly the Claremont, the original Claremont is staying. So they'll have other things besides the hotel.
It seems like a good project to me, I'd like to see it.
And the question in front of us is not though, is whether, I mean, I want to make clear, we're not commenting anything. We're just saying, we're having faith in VHCA to do the right thing because they're a pretty vigorous group, and absent any specific knowledge to the contrary, we support what they do.
Thank you.
So that's, I think, the motion and the intent of it. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed, it's unanimous. Thank you, Debbie, for bringing that up. The budget, Peggy?
Lowell, you've got the.
Yeah, there they are. Looks like she's already gone. This hasn't changed from the last proposed budget a month ago, and it will change as some figures come in and we get a little closer. But we use basically, I think, last year's figures for an average of the last 2 years' figures for Summerfest roughly, and an average of the last 2 years for tour of homes roughly, to make this proposed, and to use proposed income and expenses. And these actual numbers will change, but I would like to adopt one since I don't like to keep operating under the equivalent of continuing resolutions. If this were the US Senate, I'd rather have a budget and adopt it and adjust as we go along. Are there any comments or questions?
I would move to adopt this budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thanks. It will be moved. It will change as we go, as it always does, and we'll have it updated on that. David, onto the Parks Committee.
Yeah, so I guess the latest news there is there was a MOU or memorandum of understanding that came from Parks with Virginia-Highland volleyball. There was one in existence prior to that expired, so I have a copy of that here if anyone's interested, or I can send an electronic copy, but long and short of it is that while we are not, VHCA is not mentioned in it, we have been, there's a clause in there that grants rights for the use by Summerfest for 4 or 5 days in early June. As long as we notify the city by January 31st of that requirement each year, so Summerfest.
Shouldn't be an issue because it's
Yeah, so,
I do have a question. I reviewed it pretty quickly, but did it, was it comparable to the previous? Did you see previous agreements?
meaning like the old one?
Yeah.
Or the one, prior version?
Old, like old.
The old one, I don't know that I have seen it. You seen the old
I
one?
have seen it. It didn't mention us at all. This one, our concern about this one, there are two notable features about this. One was that it gives the Volleyball Association huge control of the volleyball courts for about 50% of the time, and then the ability to reserve more through the park system. The first version was drawn up by city lawyers using the old version, didn't mention our use of the park for Summerfest.
Yeah.
So it was held courtesy Councilmember Dickens, whom we appreciate, and we had a chance to write and insert a phrase that recounted our role in the development and improvement of the park and our use of that, and then specifically said, subject to VHCA's anticipated and planned use of Summerfest for 4 to 5 days in early June.
Yeah.
And so we reinserted, and then that's the new version. So I feel like it's perfectly understood, it's encapsulated in law. Jennifer reviewed it, I feel like we're okay, so.
I was just curious
Yeah,
about the previous.
no, the previous version didn't mention it at all.
Yeah, well, no, I just meant in general.
The one that
Are we talking about the old one with, or the revision of this?
I just read in there that
Okay.
they're, at one point, they've had previous agreements, and I just wondered how this one compared to previous agreements.
And
Other
then
than
this
just
one,
the Summerfest.
the other one was much less specific, and it goes all the way back to 1983. And so this one is a much tighter agreement.
Yeah, it's
And
pretty
it
tight.
restricts them in a lot of things and makes it clear that the Parks Department, and we try to protect our investment by making some specific requirements about anything that gets done around the volleyball court in the hopes that it won't get mucked up anytime too soon.
Yeah, okay, I was just curious.
So I think we're okay. I mean, it's as good as we can get. We got what we wanted. And by the way, I mean, you can still reserve the courts through the system. There's a lot of time that is available, and based on, I'll say this to the camera, based on historically, I wouldn't worry about being beat to it efficiently by the volleyball group.
That was not a concern at all.
Yeah. I wouldn't- I'm not worried. But we do have to, we do have to get in January and announce our dates for Summerfest every year to the Parks Department.
Okay.
So that's a requirement that
Yeah,
we do that.
that's-
I'm not saying we'd be lost if we didn't, but let's not find out.
We might want to put that on some sort of,
It's on my calendar already, but I
Yeah.
hope it'll get another page and.
Because the permit's not due
Right. Easy to get
right on top of the event practically. so-
Right, and that's an issue that's actually gonna we're addressing in the whole other permit issue, because that's a huge flaw. But the real piece is to not let parks reserve it for anybody else by getting in early with those dates, and I think we'll be fine. Calendar updates, Lola, we have the NPU meeting, our planning meeting. Anybody else have anything? The bond referendum is, you can vote now, and at the library, and on the 17th, next week's the day you can miss. We really hope everybody will vote. We're gonna try to write, actually, even if it didn't have the Monroe Drive improvements and the fire station, I think this city is severely overdue in fixing infrastructure, which has been the easy thing to forget. It's not very glamorous, and it needs to be fixed. Our kids are gonna pay a price if we don't. Anything else, any new business for anyone? Does anybody here want to discuss absent the, it's on tape, but absent the applicants, the liquor license? I'm happy to do it.
I would encourage, if you're opposed to it, come to the NPU meeting next Monday.
They'll have to have the lease at that point, right? The parking lease information? They won't?
No, they could be approved pending the revision of the lease.
Okay.
You'll have to have it in order to get.
Receive the license, get the license and start
Yeah.
Well,
operating.
right. They can get approved at the LRB ahead of time, but the actual business license shouldn't issue until the planning department signed off on it. So we will talk to them about the process. I'm curious about the process.
And I'm gonna, to add to that, basically, yes, they're changing from whatever the mercantile retail that they were before, but because we are not to the limit of restaurants and bars, they can apply to be that, and they just have to prove that they provide the parking. So it's not like they're using any of the grandfathering in of the existing one, this is a new
They're
application.
not being grandfathered in. They're applying as a brand new business, meaning if they sign with, they provide the parking, they will have met the requirements. And we don't historically oppose, we have not, things that are otherwise legal where the applicants meet the requirements. Now, we're just imposing our personal view on the situation and not the code. And if we don't like the code, we try to change the code. We've been very successful at that. Yes?
Well, so there's two parts. So we do make comments about how land is used. So there is a precedent for our making comments of saying something is too high density or multifamily, or if it's outside of the zoning that it's allowed for. So, in my mind, taking something so drastically from currently operating, in our experience, we know what it's like to have it operate during the day, to yet another bar that's already a saturated system. I live a block away and I'll have to circle the block for parking. In my mind, there's already so much stress there. during off hours, it's just very upsetting to think that there would be another bar there. And the fact that they would redo the mural is just like, forget it, like, I don't even know.
And serve bagels, which say.
Well, I mean, this isn't a point system. This is not a what we like point system. It just isn't. We don't operate that way. We have gone along with building designs that we thought were horrendous because they were legal. So it is, that is the way we have to operate. I mean, I can't imagine any other basis. Otherwise, you wind up, so I, believe it or not, try to hold my tongue a lot of times here because I stick to the code. I mean, let's go to the code. If it's illegal,
So
it's illegal.
how is this so different than the ice cream yogurt shop up at the corner? I mean, it seems like we just went on those people forever to try and get it to be something.
They didn't have the parking. They needed a variance. They got a variance. Once we approved the variance, that was legal. There's no application for a variance here at all. They comply with the law, or will they, when they, if the parking disappears, that's to be negotiated. Winnie, I mean, you're smiling, but do they comply with the law at the moment? If they get these leases, I believe absolutely they do.
I do not think that in any common sense way that they do. Because if there's a building permit out there that has not expired and they're going to rent the parking from the Doug Landau parking lot and that building permit is still active, I can't see that those two things jive at all.
And that's the one we're definitely looking into. Others have leases there, but they have been in place for a while. They may have been put in place even with an active permit, which means it will be, if we've done that before, now we'll be stopping with them if we fight it.
If the question is,
Well, of
is
course,
it,
they're not gonna want to have parking there if someone else doesn't have to have parking that they just have acquired from there. Of course not. Everybody that's up there that's had required parking in the Doug Landau parking lot would try to come under the grandfathering clause or whatever they're calling it.
Right.
that's, believe you me, if we were, yes ma'am?
I agree with you that they're meeting the code for distance requirements because they're calling themselves a restaurant. I'm not sure that they're meeting the requirements for parking. And the reason why I say that is that I think they're gonna need a special exception in order to get a parking reduction and have those leases that are assigned. And until we get that determination from planning, then I don't think that they're totally within the
They're
line.
not applying for a reduction.
I think they have to, though. I think because they're gonna have a business that they're gonna need a parking reduction. Because they're expanding the nonconformity of the business by putting more than one table in. And we can make that argument, that they're expanding the nonconformity.
They're applying for a whole new thing. They're not trying to draft off of what is existing.
Exactly, and they're expanding their hours. So the nonconformity has definitely been increased.
But they want to be conform, they say if they have 26 spaces, then they'll be conforming.
Right, but they're off-site spaces, they're not on-site, and off-site spaces
No.
generally require a special exception with the leases.
No, ma'am, that's not what the
Not
NC
in
code says.
NC.
It does not say that, it's in the node, the code specifically says, in the node.
Yeah, I've read the NC, but they still have to satisfy a parking requirement. I
It's
believe.
an administrative permit, isn't it?
It's
Yeah,
not
something
even-
like that, yeah, and I think we still can influence it because the nonconformity of the building is expanding. The hours are expanding and the use is expanding.
But how are they not meeting the requirements of the new expanded
Well,
use?
let's go talk to Enrique, I think he was the one, Vance Jones said that was the person that was reviewing their application. I think we can make an argument with
And beyond
to
that,
make sure that it's clear.
if we don't, it seems that the point is, and we've known it for a long time, that there's an issue with this node. And is it something that we look at neighborhood commercial again for that node? Do we make any adjustments there? We talked about it in the master plan also, but it seems like that's where if we see consistent issues in some of our retail areas, then we have to look at the foundational code that we've written for them and see what we need to change.
Well, the church rezoning was part of the master plan recommendation, and if you told the people who lived there, that HOA, oh, there's a new bar going in, they would like to use this rezoned lot, hell no. That's never gonna happen.
And what's happening independent of that, so at least it didn't get tied to that. But fair enough, but I don't see what change we're gonna make. I can't imagine we're gonna lessen the parking requirement. I mean, there are two things still at work in this discussion. One is that the whole master plan, the philosophy and theory and push of the master plan anticipates a more ambulatory society that is heavily dependent on privately owned cars that are driven around and parked repeatedly to go to places.
By drunk people.
That is still the society that we have, and we don't have the capacity yet in place to change it. And so that's the contradiction. I mean, we're not making any more parking over there. Maybe we could add that parking that you just talked about. But there's no more, nobody's tearing down anything to put up a parking lot, and we don't want them to. And so.
Although we do have places specified for that, if somebody would like to. 3.
Yeah, but that's not tearing anything down, that's just going up a parking lot in the back. So yes, you could expand that capacity if it ever becomes feasible. Nobody's busting themselves anywhere to do that in the NC, because you don't get our money back on it, but, yes ma'am.
Well, if you're assuming an ambulatory society, you're also assuming people are only gonna walk about half a mile radius. So I don't even know how many people live within half a mile of all those bars, they're certainly not gonna drink all that alcohol themselves.
There are there's a good many people. That's where our highest density is.
It is, yeah, but there's also, like, to Atkins Park, you'd only really go one direction. I'm saying there's people drive there, like, that's what's gonna happen. You're not gonna walk, there's not enough diversity of uses in that node.
Well, I don't know, Jess, until I met you and Greg, I didn't know anybody under the age of 27 that walked as much as y'all did, so who knows what's gonna happen here, but, I mean, it's just all about expectation, but, look, we can ask Enrique, he's the person we'd be asking for the interpretation, starting with on the interpreter, him and Aaron. I'd like to hear what Aaron thinks based on his experience, but I wouldn't underestimate Vance Jones, having checked that very, very thoroughly. He's not missed a beat yet. Yes, ma'am?
When those plans for the mix went into the city, the people that had off-site parking in that lot had to be also provided for in that new building. So it's as recent as that the city was saying you can't just have parking and because you lose it, it becomes grandfathered.
Yes, ma'am, I completely agree with you that was the unwritten, anecdotal version of what we were given then by somebody that neither you or I can even remember. And that's the classic in the planning department. They don't write this stuff down. I wish they did. I really
But
wish
in
they
those
did.
plans, it was provided for those spots.
So we could infer that for the dark horse, that was what the 28 spots that Doug needed for
And
the.
the other buildings
That claim
that
that
claim
space.
that space
Right.
also.
That's right, so we can infer those
That's a good
spots.
point, actually.
We can infer that, and it's fine with me. As I expressed here, I believe that I would
Well,
like.
the law didn't change, the code didn't change on that.
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
it would have come through the MPU and we would have known about it.
Right, nor did the code change in applying variances either. It didn't change a word to my knowledge in the last 10 years, but boy, it is a 100% different experience down there now than it was 10 years ago. Really changed drastically. Things that used to be hard are now given away like candy at Halloween. Just here, get a handful, go for it. So it's a different ballgame, and this is part of what in theory Aaron and Bob are supposed to wrestle with, and I don't see it happening very soon, but that's where we're at, so. all we can do is pose this question, but I don't see us opposing this. If they have, the planning department says it's acceptable, they're the ones, unless we wanna go to court, that's what it would take, is hiring a lawyer and filing a very laborious lawsuit about process that's without any black letter material to point to.
So, I'm just catching it up, but what Wendy is saying is true, the last plans that we saw for the mix, they did in their parking decks.
That's right.
Account for
That's right.
all of those spaces. Did they do it because it was land out and he has a legal requirement because he leased those to the other people? So if somebody else is doing it, they may not have that same obligation to uphold Landau's current leases. See, I don't know if
I
that
don't
was.
think he gave them 10-year leases, do you? That's not the way he usually plays his game.
Usually it's year to year. He's doing that.
Can you, right now there's like $5 still to park there, is it only certain spaces after certain hours that can be $5? I thought businesses had to have free parking.
No,
Does it have to be
Is
free?
it over there? So they could say these spaces are with the bourbon bar, but you still pay $5 to park there. Okay.
Yeah, because any restaurant can charge you,
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
So we cleared up, there's no hookups. The hookup thing was a complete rumor. Are you bummed out, Deal?
You're gonna continue to go to the dog unit spot for your
Before are we ready to adjourn?
I'm so ready.
Before we, I won't delay it long. I just wanted to mention that John Wolfinger's mother passed away last week, and in memory of that, the board made a donation of $100 to the Virginia-Highland Conservation League for the fire station. And I have a sympathy card here that I'm going to
Pass it
give.
around if you want.
You want to sign it individually or just do
Oh,
Virginia-Highland
we can
board?
sign it individually, I think that's fine.
And then I'm going to get some flowers tomorrow and take them over.
That would be great, thank you for doing the latter.
Is he back?
I don't know that, but
He
I
is
got.
back, I talked to him today.
Okay, good.
Anything else? Anything else at all?
Don't be begging.
No, you know me, I'll just tell you to sit down and be quiet, you know?
Don't be begging for more. It's over.
People ask, all the
Meeting
money
is
that's
adjourned.
in,
Go ahead.
all the money